Hey everyone, it's Zach Beck. There are nearly 45 million Americans who have student loans totaling $1.7 trillion. The average student loan debt is over $32,000 per individual, and the average monthly payment is over $390. Now, this is a staggering issue that is affecting millions of Americans and preventing their ability from moving forward financially by either purchasing a home, starting a family, investing in their retirement, or doing other things that would tangibly impact our economy in a positive manner. So there are two ways the government can address this issue. One is through a formal act of Congress where a piece of legislation is passed by Congress, then signed by the president into law. And the other alternative is if the president himself would actually go forward and issue an executive order to address this particular issue. So what I want to do in this video is talk about what President-elect Biden has proposed when it comes to addressing student loans and how they would impact you if his policies were put into practice after he's inaugurated in January. So let's take our time, dive into the details, and jump into it right now. On the campaign trail, President-elect Joe Biden proposed canceling up to $10,000 in student loan debt for federally backed student loans. This would impact up to 37 million borrowers and have a tangible impact on our economy. Now, when it comes to how he would actually specifically address this issue, once again, there are two approaches that he could take. One would be through a formal act of Congress, and the House Democrats previously passed a bill called the HEROES Act. This went through the House of Representatives, but it was not passed by the Senate. The Senate was controlled by the Republican Party, and they actually moved forward with what was called the HEALS Act. Since the same difference occurs where we have the House of Representatives controlled by the Democrats and the Republicans control the Senate, with now a Democratic individual becoming the president, it looks like passage of a bill would be very difficult to accomplish at this time. Therefore, if we look at the executive action, there is a tangible premise that looks like it could work if he were to use it. And that is because the Higher Education Act was passed previously and now is currently law, and it provides broad authority to the president to direct the Education Secretary to cancel student loan debt. Therefore, depending upon what the president-elect wants to do on the inauguration day, he conceivably could move forward and actually cancel student loan debt. One thing to bear in mind, though, is we do not know yet who the Education Secretary is going to be. Most likely, whoever he selects into that position is going to have the belief of him to actually want to cancel student loan debt. Therefore, we'd expect that person to execute his order. However, we do not know who that individual is going to be because they are going to have to be confirmed by the Senate, which once again is controlled by the Republican Party. And because we have differing philosophies on the Republican and the Democratic side of the aisle when it comes to this issue, not saying which one is better, they just have differing views, it's going to be interesting to see what type of approach the president takes when it comes into his approach on actually addressing this issue. If you don't have student loan debt yet, but you anticipate going to college in the future, you might actually benefit from some of the proposals President-elect Biden has actually put forward. And one is actually, he has said he wants to have 2 years free community college to everyone, or they can choose to have job training. Say you want to become an electrician, a plumber, or something to that extent, go to more of a trade school as opposed to a formal community college. I think that's actually just really good for us to be aware of, is that not everyone is made to go to college. It's not necessarily the best path for every single individual. There are job training opportunities out there where those positions do pay a very good living wage where someone could actually go and have a full-on career for the rest of their lives if they have that specific skill. So actually having that option right now is a good thing to be aware of. It's something that exists currently, but it could become tuition free if this proposal were to become law. Furthermore, what he has proposed is actually making college and universities that are public institutions, making them tuition free for the 4 years if that individual is part of a family that makes less than $125,000 a year. Now, this would make student loan debt almost not really necessary anymore unless people are going to maybe postgraduate work and trying to do things a little bit further along those lines, or if they're from a family that's better off financially. So this is an interesting proposal. Once again, someone might say whether or not this is fair if someone who makes more does have to pay for college and someone who makes less doesn't have to pay for college, but these are the costs and benefits and the trade-offs that we see that happen in our government and in our democracy. So I'm not here to say that either this is a good plan or a bad plan. I'm just saying this is one of the proposals that he has put forward. Once again, this is interesting to note that when we have this divided Congress, it might be difficult for something like this to actually pass through a formal law. So once again, this might be something that has to be done through an executive order or an executive action, and we'll see what type of leeway he's expecting to put himself through if he wants to get this done. Your level of income could directly impact the amount of student loans you owe. According to the proposals put forward by President-elect Joe Biden, he said that if individuals who make less than $25,000 a year would no longer owe federally backed student loans, and they wouldn't accrue interest on those loans. So those loans would actually be forgiven for people making less than $25,000 a year. Now, as it relates to people who make more than $25,000 a year, he has actually proposed utilizing what's called an income-driven repayment plan. And this is where you pay a set percentage of your discretionary income, and then you can allocate those finances towards your student loans. For example, in his proposal, he says that individuals who make more than $25,000 a year would have to pay 5% of their discretionary income towards their student loans. And if they did so for a total of 20 years and they did it responsibly, never missing payments, then their student loans would actually be forgiven after that time frame. So this is interesting to be aware of, because obviously this would once again either require an act of Congress or it'd be an executive order. But if you actually are either one of these economic thresholds, it would impact you directly in a very different way. President-elect Biden has actually proposed creating a program for individuals who work in public service. So let's say you work at a school, you work for the government, or you work in a nonprofit setting. What he is proposing is canceling up to $10,000 of student loan debt for every year of public service. So that's something that would actually encourage people to serve in government, in schools, and the nonprofit sector, and would actually expedite the process by which they would have their student loan debts canceled. So once again, this is an interesting proposal. It could either be done through executive action or through a formal piece of legislation. So we'll see what he does moving forward from here. One thing to be aware of is that if you have a private student loan, it's not necessarily clear if any of these executive actions or pieces of legislation would directly impact you. That is because up until this point, the discussion is really centered on federally backed student loans. And that is because the majority of student loans that are actually out there in society right now are from the federal government. And that is where you're seeing the federal government has more of a direct say in what they can do as it relates to forgiving them, since they are carrying the note on those loans. It's going to be much more difficult for the federal government to tell a private institution or lending agency that they have to cancel student loan debt to an individual who's taken it out from them. But I would say that the government does have far-reaching power. It is possible that we could see some sort of action done to address private student loans, but right now I would say the focus should really be on federally backed student loans, because I don't want to go too deep in the details and anything else that we don't know clearly as of this moment. You might be asking yourself, does canceling student loan debt actually solve the problem long term? And there are arguments from both sides that say yes and no. And I think what's important for us to be aware of is there is a system that has been put in place previously that has now caused the situation to unfold, where millions of Americans are in student loan debt, and they've taken on that debt by making a personal choice to actually go and receive a higher level of education to hopefully move forward and achieve longer term career goals so that way they can advance economically. Now, one could say that this is not fair for us to cancel student loans, and I think there's validity to that argument. There's other valid arguments that say, hey, I didn't know what I was doing at that age, so what should I be expected to do moving forward? But then the flip side, the individual is going to say, well, why, as a responsible person who either paid off their student loans or who didn't take out a student loan, have to pay off the student loan for someone else who made that decision? Once again, there is not a silver bullet when it comes to answering this question. My only thought is that in our society today, we do a lot to economically stimulate certain sectors of the economy. We've bailed out financial institutions, we've bailed out the mortgage industry, we've done other things before, and we've even bailed out the auto industry. So I'm not saying that we should be bailing out the student loan industry right now. I'm just saying that there's valid arguments on both sides where there could be a precedent that sets this moving forward. My concern though is, let's say if they do something dramatic where they actually go forward, they cancel all the student loan debt. What we don't want to have is 20 years from now or 30 years from now have the exact same thing happen again, because to me that would then be significantly unfair to the taxpayers moving forward, because then they're going to have to foot the bill again in the future. So hopefully if they do something right now and address this, whatever it is, according to the different proposals that I've outlined previously, hopefully then there will be systems put in place to prevent this from happening again in the future. Once again, whether college becomes tuition free, whether they have a better incentive program, but what I believe is most important is that we have more financial literacy out in society so that people can make well-informed decisions moving forward. Because an 18-year-old taking on $100,000 student loan debt to get a degree that might not necessarily yield a job that pays that back in the future is not a very sustainable approach to take, and it's not really good that we're having people doing that, not understanding the importance or the gravity of the decisions they've made. So once again, I am not necessarily taking a side that student loan debt can't cancellation is good or that it's bad. I'm just saying this is kind of where things are right now. So what is going to happen moving forward will really dramatically impact what is going to happen as we address this issue long term. So I don't necessarily know if we're going to see any sort of dramatic overhaul of the student loan industry, but if we do, it might yield a better result for our society long term, which ultimately does impact all of us as taxpayers and obviously in our society as a whole, because when people are financially and economically distressed, that has a ripple effect. That's a very personal issue that then ripples out into society where people are more negative. They might not be able to advance in their careers. They might not start families, and they might not be contributing to the community. And it just can be a degradation of our society as a whole. And I'm not saying student loans are the only thing that caused this. It's just one little aspect of it. But for the individuals who are watching right now who do have student loans, I'm sure you understand how significant of a weight they are on your shoulders. And I'm very sorry you're having to encounter that right now, because I know you're doing everything you can to tackle these debts, that way you can be financially free moving forward. Irrespective of what Congress does or President-elect Biden does when it comes to addressing student loans, I believe it is important that as individuals, you can take tangible steps right now to address this issue moving forward. Back when Congress passed the CARES Act, they passed a piece of this legislation that actually addressed student loans directly by pausing student loan payments through the end of the year. However, January 1st is fast approaching and those payments are going to start becoming due. Therefore, no matter what's going to happen with either Congress or the new president, it's important to get yourself positioned right now, because that's the reality of the situation moving forward. So I just want to give you a couple quick steps that you can take to try and address this and position yourself most effectively so you can pay off your student loans at least until a time comes when they might be canceled. Number one, I'd recommend contact your student loan servicer right now so that you understand what you owe, how the pandemic relief bill actually impacts your student loan payments, and what you need to do to position yourself to make sure that you don't miss a payment so you don't damage your credit score or put yourself either further and further in debt. Second, if you are struggling financially, I would recommend enrolling in an income-driven repayment plan. Now, I mentioned previously, President-elect Biden is trying to utilize this type of a plan so that people can pay less of their discretionary income to actually repay their student loans. Now, what's going to happen is if he does that moving forward, he might change the percentage requirements, like I said previously, of 5% of your discretionary income for a set period of time. And that's not necessarily the case right now, but you can still utilize this service to hopefully lower your overall monthly liability, especially if you were either furloughed or if you're unemployed due to the pandemic and you're struggling financially. This is something you can do right now to at least lower your liability so that when January comes, you can at least begin making those payments and they're not going to devastate you. Another step you want to take is count your payments towards public service loan forgiveness. And that is because if you were continuing to make payments during the period of student loan forbearance, where Congress actually pushed the pause button on the student loans, if you actually made payments during that time, you can still get credit for that, especially if you are going through the public service loan program. So my encouragement is go forward and do that, and that will make sure that you're getting everything counted up to the specific allowable amounts for that particular program. You also want to make sure that you count your payments towards your student loan rehabilitation, because if you were in student loan forbearance and you actually had your student loans in default during that time frame, if you continue to make payments when student loans were forbeared during that time when Congress pushed the pause button, you want to make sure that those payments are going directly towards your rehabilitation so you can move forward and actually get your student loans under control. One of the most effective tools you can utilize right now is to actually refinance your student loans. The Federal Reserve is going to keep interest rates near 0% all the way through 2023 or 2024. Therefore, now is a great opportunity to refinance your student loans. And if you do so, it hopefully overall lower your monthly liability and make it more feasible for you to actually pay off your student loans moving forward. With all that being said, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. If you wouldn't mind, please like the video. That would really help the channel out for the YouTube algorithm, help push this video to other people who might need to hear it. Because you might have a friend or a family member who's struggling with their student loans and trying to figure out a pathway forward. Furthermore, if you have any questions, please comment down below. I know this is a very intense issue that has differing opinions on both sides. I'd love to hear from people who either agree with student loan forgiveness or who disagree with that, because I believe we need to foster that type of dialogue. Furthermore, I'd love to do any research on your behalf so you can make well-informed decisions moving forward. If you wouldn't mind, please subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot to myself personally, as I do everything I can to create positive content that makes an impact in your life and encourages you and myself to lead lives of meaning and purpose, all while maintaining balance and moderation. And if you do subscribe to the channel, please tap the notification bell. That will notify you every time I post a video, which I do on a weekly basis. Once again, I'd like to thank you for watching the video today. I look forward to talking to you next time. Have a great day.